Candlebox is a band that critics, fellow musicians, and some in the music industry wrote off as being derivative, using their connections with music's biggest pop star, as well as the popularity of the Seattle music scene to further their own career. Was it an accurate assessment? Well, that's for you guys to decide. I'm just here to tell their story. Frontman Kevin Martin perfectly summarized the early part of the band's career, telling author Mark Yarm, "We were the redheaded stepchild. We were in the right place at the right time. Fortunately, our music had its own voice. Unfortunately, everybody believed that we had moved there to steal the sound." Today, let's talk about the band's unorthodox rise, their hugely successful debut record, and the backlash that accompanied it. Candlebox was made up of vocalist Kevin Martin, guitarist Peter Klett, bassist Barty Martin, and drummer Scott Mercado. All of the band members grew up in and around Seattle, with the exception of frontman Kevin Martin, who previously lived in San Antonio, Texas. He moved to Seattle at the age of 14 or 15, depending on what you read, around 1984 and 1985, long before grunge took over the world. It's important to note that the members of Candlebox were also on average 5 years younger than a lot of the other bands like Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains, who broke big during the early 90s. During his time in Texas, Kevin Martin was influenced by punk groups like Black Flag and Dead Kennedys, and by his own admission, he claimed that moving to Seattle was kind of like a culture shock because he was surprised by the type of music people were playing there. He recalled seeing one show in Seattle that the British band The Cult played, which influenced him to start a band. Between 85 and 90, Martin played drums in a variety of Seattle bands who played punk all the way to jazz rock fusion, with names like RYPD, Social Smash, and Dolly's Opera. He met drummer Scott Mercado when he crashed Martin's 16th birthday party. But musically, they didn't actually get together until May of 91, forming the group Uncle Duke. Mercado went to school to learn jazz drumming. Guitarist Peter Klett joined the duo in September of 91, while bassist Barty Martin joined the trio in December of 91. And the band changed their name to Candlebox. All the members up until this point had played in their fair share of groups, with Mercado being on average 4 to 5 years older than the other members. So where did the name Candlebox come from? Well, the members admitted they liked the phrase boxed in like candles, borrowing from the Midnight Oil song Tin Legs and Tin Minds. Boxed in like candles, polar bear pride. Someone in the band one day suggested Candlebox, and thus the name was born. They only played something like 25 gigs before recording their major label debut. One of the questions you may have about Candlebox is what kind of relationship did they have with their counterparts like Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden? Well, in an interview that Kevin Martin gave to a German website, Grungery, he talked about it in detail. He revealed how he used to work at a shoe store at the age of 16 where, coincidentally enough, Chris Cornell's first wife and manager, Susan Silver, also worked. She managed the shoe store while having her own music management company behind the building. That's how Martin met Chris Cornell. He revealed, "She managed a shoe store called John Fluvog. So that's how I met Chris. That's how I met Andy Wood. That's how I met Lane Staley. That's how I met Jerry Cantrell. It was really amazing for me to meet guys that I admired musically, and at the same time, I was playing drums in a band. I never thought it would turn into a friendship because I was so much younger." Martin later admitted that Andrew Wood and Malfunction probably influenced him the most out of all the Seattle bands. But beyond that, in other interviews, the members admitted they weren't really in the same scene musically as the big four bands from Seattle. And that was also due to the fact that they were 5 to 6 years younger than those guys as well. Candlebox's inspirations were also said to be far more ranging, going back all the way to the 60s, citing Jimi Hendrix, Cream, and Led Zeppelin comes up a lot in a lot of their old interviews. At the same time, the band did admit that being in Seattle definitely helped their career. Kevin Martin added, "Because industry people would come up to Seattle, where if we lived in Idaho or something, that wouldn't have happened." Right from the get-go, it seemed like there was instant chemistry between the members. Barty Martin told author Mark Yarm, "I was the last person to join. What ended up being You, which was one of the songs that did really well, happened when we were improvising. The first hour we were together, I had a rough song idea that became Far Behind, and I think we worked on that night too. It was by the spring of '92 the band recorded an 8-song demo tape that was scrapped together with whatever little money the members had. Martin admitted the demo tape sounded like a mix between Aerosmith and Rush. It consisted of the songs You and Far Behind, the only songs that actually made their debut record. The other songs slowly came out on their subsequent albums. The members were working menial jobs to make ends meet, and they were selling whatever they could minus their own instruments to raise funds for some studio time. Kevin Martin, like I said, worked at a shoe store. He also worked as a janitor telling the Rocket, "It paid for my apartment and gave me $100 spending money. Boy, it was a pain in the ass vacuuming stairs." But it was Barty Martin who probably had the most interesting job delivering pizza to strippers. Peter Klett worked as a busboy and at Tower Records. He also worked at a stove manufacturing company, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for him to come to practice covered in soot. Scott Mercado, meanwhile, worked at an espresso shop. He taught drum lessons out of his home, and he also worked as an office manager. But it was the band's manager who really came through selling his card to help finance the recording sessions for their demo tape, a tape that was cut over 2 days in the studio. Producer Kelly Gray, who played with Queensryche, helped the band record their demo. He told Mark Yarm, "When Kevin was singing Far Behind in the studio, I looked at their then manager and said, 'These guys are going to make us rich.' It was obvious." Like I mentioned before, Candlebox didn't play a ton of gigs in their early days, but the gigs they did play just happened to have A&R people in attendance from the record labels. Despite this, the audiences seemed to love their music. They sold their demo tape at these gigs, selling all 600 copies in their first 2 months. The band soon started playing sold-out shows at local Seattle venues like the Paramount Theater before nabbing a major record deal. Then in September of '92, Candlebox nabbed a spot on the Bumbershoot Festival Showcase, which was sponsored by the music industry's leading song publishers at the Off-Ramp in Seattle. The idea was that a bunch of bands were going to play, and reps from the labels would choose who gets to do a showcase a month later in Los Angeles. When Candlebox flew to LA to play the showcase a month later, 5 record labels wanted to sign them. The band chose to sign with Madonna's newly established label, Maverick Records. They became the label's first signed act. They chose Maverick because they were a reasonably small operation with only 30 employees, but they also had distribution through Warner Brothers. They also felt that they were going to get a lot of support and be a priority. Interestingly though, Maverick didn't flaunt Candlebox's Seattle connections in promoting the group's first album, with Martin admitting to the Daily Herald, "We were really not into the punk side of Nirvana or the really heavy side of Soundgarden or the deep side of Alice in Chains. We're just kind of a rock and roll band, I guess." He later admitted that when the band did become famous, people were actually surprised to learn they were from Seattle. There was also the sense in the press around 1993 that being a band from Seattle was so cliche, and in fact, before Candlebox got signed, they were told by people from Seattle they would likely never nab a recording deal because they were from Seattle. While it appeared that audiences in Seattle liked the band, it was local rock journalists, club promoters, and even their fellow bands who seemed to hate them. Candlebox were quickly being accused of being from LA and only choosing to move to Seattle after the music scene took off, and it probably didn't help that Courtney Love repeated this lie as well. Also not helping was that on their demo tape, their manager, who was from Los Angeles, had their address listed on the back of the tape. Others accused the band of sleeping with Madonna when, in reality, they didn't meet the pop star until a year after their record came out. They were also accused of being rich kids whose parents financed their career. And bassist Elizabeth Davis from the Seattle group 70 Year Bitch shared a popular sentiment around Seattle's music scene, telling the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, "It's like they came out of nowhere and got so popular. It's sickening." As for Courtney Love, the band did have some fun with her whole criticism of the group riding Nirvana's coattails. The members a few years later dressed up as Courtney Love when they were interviewed by the Seattle publication The Rocket. As for how the band felt about all the criticism from fellow Seattle musicians, Kevin Martin told Mark Yarm, "We'd been in a band for about a year and a half, and some people felt that wasn't long enough, which never made any sense to me. The biggest detractors were the young bands that weren't successful. They felt that we didn't really deserve it. We took a lot of in the city, and nobody ever stood up for us." Maverick issued the band's debut record, which is self-titled, in July of '93. Their label was really instrumental in setting up the record for success. In May of '93, several months before the album came out, Maverick sent out a sampler cassette of Candlebox's debut record to both college and independent radio stations to help build buzz around the record. It wasn't long after this that these stations started playing the group's songs. On top of that, Maverick discounted the first 150,000 copies of their debut album to $11.99 on CD and $6.98 on cassette, boosting initial record sales. Couple this with heavy play on MTV's specialty programs like Headbangers Ball and Alternative Nation. Soon, radio stations in Seattle, Baltimore, Boston, Denver, and Tampa Bay started playing Candlebox. Despite all the hate they got from fellow Seattle bands, they did get some help from local radio station KISW, who played a lot of the band's music. A spokesman for the station told Billboard magazine, "People respond to Candlebox because they're very passionate. The music is raw and real and not a formula they were going by, and people can read that." Maverick attributed the band's success to a few other things: the cross-format appeal of the group's songs to college, alternative metal, and album-oriented rock formats. The first single from the album, Change, spent over 3 months on the rock charts, peaking at number 18 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. It was an odd choice for a single given that its runtime was over 6 minutes, not exactly a radio standard. The band's label was also against issuing it as the first single, but the band got their way. The next single that was issued was You, which was a song about frontman Kevin Martin's own experience with drug addiction, recalling how he had stolen money from his parents to buy drugs when he was in high school. Then at the age of 18, he had a moment of clarity after seeing Midnight Oil in concert. He soon paid his parents back, and the song became the group's first crossover hit, peaking at number 78 on the Hot 100 chart and number 6 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. The video also had a big name behind it in director Samuel Baer, who you guys might remember as being the director behind Smells Like Teen Spirit, Zombie, as well as No Rain and a bunch of other early 90s staples. Despite the early success of their debut album, the band held back what they thought was going to be the biggest single, wanting to have a slow build for the record. That song was Far Behind, which peaked at number 18 on the Hot 100 chart and number 4 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. It also peaked at number 7 on the alternative airplay chart. The song was written as a tribute to Andrew Wood of the band Mother Love Bone and Malfunction, and it was also written about Kevin Martin's own friends that he had lost to addiction, as well as himself. Far Behind was the single that catapulted the album into the stratosphere. Within a year of its release, Candlebox's debut record went double platinum, and the group wasn't done just yet. The fourth and final single, Cover Me, peaked at number 23 on the alternative airplay chart and number 8 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. The album remained on the charts for a whopping 2 years and went on to sell 4 million copies in the States. The group's album went on to sell 300,000 copies just in the state of Washington alone. People loved Candlebox so much that even their bootlegs started showing up at radio conventions, with one being named the last great Seattle band. Candlebox also won Best New Band in Metal Edge magazine's 1994 Reader's Choice Award. But most of the reviews about their debut album were not positive. Even Billboard magazine slammed the band, writing initially, "The band doesn't know whether they're Soundgarden, Extreme, or Led Zeppelin. They have no commercial success headed their way." Other reviewers criticized the group for lacking originality, and critics derided the band for being derivative. Even though they got heavy play on MTV, Beavis and Butthead didn't give the group much respect either.
That sounds pretty cool for Ugly Kid Joe.
Hey, Butthead, I don't think this is Ugly Kid Joe.
Well, he's ugly.
Candlebox toured relentlessly in support of their debut album, initially opening for Living Colour, Rush, as well as Metallica. In fact, another thing that greatly helped the band was the turmoil in Alice in Chains. The band, having released their Jar of Flies EP in early '94, were poised to tour with Metallica in the summer of '94, in addition to playing Woodstock. But Alice had to back out due to frontman Lane Staley's personal problems. Candlebox took Alice's spot for the highly anticipated Metallica summer tour and the Woodstock appearance. The Metallica shows also featured Suicidal Tendencies, and the members admitted that the Metallica crowds were pretty indifferent towards them, and Suicidal Tendencies' Mike Muir wasn't exactly friendly towards them either. Drummer Scott Mercado revealed that he was friends with Alice in Chains drummer Sean Kinney, but despite their relationship, Kinney was honest about his distaste for Candlebox, with the drummer recalling to Mark Yarm. He told me, "I like your style. You're a great drummer. I just don't like your singer. I don't like your music." I admired Sean for saying that as opposed to talking about us behind my back. By late '94, Candlebox started headlining their own shows alongside groups like the Flaming Lips. Even Flaming Lips didn't give the band much respect, with frontman Wayne Coyne telling Mark Yarm, "Candlebox wasn't just a nail in the coffin for grunge. To me, they arrived as the coffin for grunge. We toured with them for 3 months at the end of 1994, and at the beginning of that phase, they were playing 4,000 to 5,000 people a night. And by the end, they were playing giant arenas, hockey rinks for the most part, that hold 10,000 people, and they're selling them out a couple nights in a row." Coyne added, "We saw the clumsiness of their shows and their songs, and everything about it seemed, damn, this is too much too soon. Candlebox really had nothing." By the end of their first major tour, the band just seemed burnt out and scared of what was to come next for them. They spent 18 months on the road playing around 450 shows. Candlebox's debut record represented a commercial high for the band that they'd never be able to replicate. And that was due to a changing musical scene, changing musical tastes, and Burnout, as well as lineup changes. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And thank you for all the support over the last year on my channel. And we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care, guys.